I cannot believe I'm saying this, but 5 years ago, I decided to make a series where I recreate all these Star Wars posters, and this was the first one. Looks like shit. In the years that followed, my skills have developed quite a bit, and you can see that in the posters that followed. Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith looked considerably better, but I'd still be lying if I said I loved them today. A New Hope changed everything, however, because whilst this might not be the most original concept, the quality jump from the last one to this was actually significant. And that makes sense because it was much later, of course, but not actually that much later, just a year later. That was still 4 years ago. In the meantime, I did make other Star Wars posters, but I never finished this series specifically. I never made The Empire Strikes Back or Return of the Jedi. Now, you totally thought I had abandoned this series. I totally had. But you're wrong. Today, we are finally gonna make The Empire Strikes Back poster in the same style I did the previous ones. Let's not waste any more time. 4 years seems plenty. Let's get to it. First, I started looking for images to use, and as always, this was a huge pain in the ass. These movies and characters are old, so there's very few proper photos available. And it's a little sad, because that specific aspect is always gonna hold you back in some way, which you can see very well in the previous Star Wars poster specifically. The compositions are decent, but when you zoom in, it's just not that good. I ended up with these photos you see here, and some of them are multiple photos stitched together, like the Tauntaun with Han Solo on it, and Yoda, and even Luke here has been extended and enhanced using AI. It is a little bit of everything, I guess. And again, it leaves quite a bit to be desired, but it's the best I can do. You also may have noticed for once I didn't actually include every single character. Leia, Lando, 3PO, R2, and Chewbacca aren't here, but there are so many characters in these films, I just went with the most iconic and intriguing ones. This Boba Fett photo, by the way, is from Fettastic. It's his Boba Fett costume, and he allowed me to use this photo for my poster, and that's great, because this pose is perfect for my idea. Using these, I started trying out some different compositions and quickly ended up with something along the lines of this. A diagonal composition seemed fitting since the Empire Strikes Back logo also is angled. This way it would all line up very well, which results in a very satisfying poster. Now, just as the previous posters in this series, this isn't a super daring or original concept, but my original idea 5 years ago was to give them a modern twist to the originals. And nowadays we see tons of these floating head posters. That is what these are, floating head posters. In order for it to at least kind of remain a series, I gotta stick with that for now. This seems like a solid idea though, so let's get straight to it. This icy adventure started out with me importing the title and text elements from my previous poster first, to make sure everything is in the right place and at least somewhat consistent with the previous posters. I did also add the actual Empire Strikes Back title design, because this one would end up having 2 versions. I placed my characters in here one by one, making sure they are all lining up with the sketch I had previously cooked up. I of course had all of them cut out already, because well, let's not waste any more screen time on that, shall we? Now that we can really begin, I put in a snowy foreground which would serve as the base for the landscape. I made sure it stretched out all the way to both sides and removed the sky from this image using the pen tool. I thought it'd be nice to merge a second snowy image onto it, so we have some different looking textures in the snow. With levels, I harmonized the lightness of both images, and since this ended up being bright as heck, the logo naturally had to become black instead. To finish off this base landscape towards the back, I popped in some more snowy images, this time with hills in the back. I once again stitched them together, and after some cutting and pasting, I realized that is trash. Let's use something else. These appeared to be a little bit better, so I repeated the previous steps once more. Now, before finishing the background, I actually got too excited already and began blending in the Tauntaun. The light would be coming from both sides, but mainly from the right. Using shadows, I tried recreating those lighting conditions onto this character. You can tell here the image quality isn't anything to write home about, but it's all we've got, so I had to make it work somehow. After definitely a little bit of a hassle, it surprisingly ended up looking okay. I put his feet in the snow as well using a brush, and painted a nice long shadow on the snow below. This made it look really integrated into the landscape, allowing me to move on to the next step, finishing that background. I used a final snowy image for the sky in the distance, fading all of this out to black thankfully looked alright, and after some subtle blending, that looked pretty neat. So far, so good. I unhid Luke and Vader and decided to first do Luke, since, well, he's quite literally the center point of the composition and the movie. I faded out his body into the snowy background using some solid colors and color balance. I even blurred his lower body a little bit for the best effect. This looks alright, and well, this is where the fun begins. Using exposure, I began painting some highlights on the right side of his face, where the main light source is coming from. Later I would do the other side as well, but on a separate layer, so I could color them individually. You can really tell how poor quality this image is, though, but I just really loved this iconic moment being in the poster somehow. After the highlights were complete, I started trying to clean up this photo a little bit, starting with making his hair brown again, and also his skin tone. It all looked super unnatural for a while, but at least it's slightly better than before. I then grabbed the highlights on the left and brought some color into that. Blue seemed nice given the overall tone so far, so that was the logical option. And well, there's Luke Skywalker, at least for now. Boba Fett is next, and once again, big shout out to Fettastic for allowing me to use this photo. It is kind of the same steps here again, except now without all the individual fixes. I faded out his body onto the ground below and later moved onto highlights once again, one on the right and one very subtle one on the left. For Boba, we already had decent lighting to begin with, so this didn't make a huge difference, but it's still a little bit more crisp like this. The same thing had to happen again, but with shadows instead, to create a nice contrast between him and Luke. At the end, that made for a nice, crisp, contrastful result. So far, I was quite happy with the progress. Our boy Vader was next, and because he's all black and shiny, that didn't take nearly as long. It's pretty basic stuff, actually. Once these first three important characters were in place, I decided to pop in a traditional starry sky behind them. That immediately made it look 20 times better and gave it a nice Star Wars feeling as well. The last actual character we needed was of course Yoda, and I hate to repeat myself again, but guys, it's the same steps. Again, lots of blending, shadows and little tweaks to kind of merge him together with the rest. Definitely took a second for him, but it ended up looking alright. A very important thing though was adding the twinkles in his eyes to make him just feel more alive. Big game changer there. And this is when I realized Luke's shirt had become green due to the original environment he was in, but in reality it's supposed to be beige, so I fixed that. Now the whole thing is starting to take shape. We've now arrived at the point where we add additional elements, such as vehicles and other background stuff. The Falcon obviously was a must given its prominent role in the movie, and behind it a few snowspeeders flying around. On the left I put down arguably the most iconic things in this entire movie, the AT-ATs. I had a few different ones for variety and even went with an AT-ST as well to finish it off. In the sky above, I put 3 TIE bombers as well. Again, they are a thing in this movie specifically, so that makes sense. And on the right side, Luke's X-Wing taking off to Dagobah. Now, I noticed there was some room for fog and smoke in between the characters, something I often did back then with these designs. And this always helps making it feel more cohesive and glowy. And that glowiness in particular is good to at least kind of get that retro effect in there, to really make these posters a nice combination of modern and classic. But now back to the vehicles. I added a lot of blue tones and fogginess to the AT-ATs. They had to be really part of that landscape, so I treated them accordingly. With levels, I created some distance between them, because well, as you know, the less contrast, the more distance there appears to be. And I was actually very happy with how that ended up looking. And a final touch for this would be some haze at the very top. These were all things I had to do for the other ships as well, like the Falcon. I first had to be sure the lighting direction matched, and then it was back to the same things again. Something cool I thought of, however, was to add some snow flying up behind it. This would add some action and crispiness to this area. While doing this, I experimented with an explosion as well, and that looked surprisingly nice, so I kept it. And in the end, this proved itself to be a crucial splash of color too, because without that, it's very much just blue dominated. This is where I experimented with lasers too, by the way, but I wasn't really happy at all with how this looked, at least in this area, so instead I put them on the AT-ATs. Much better. Finally, the same blending process had to happen for the TIE bombers and X-Wing, so I made short work of that. At the very end, I even put in some little snowtroopers for a fun detail, and then I finally realized I had forgotten all about Dagobah in the background. I grabbed the image I had found and put it in the same way I intended in the first place. It is subtle, but it adds a lot to the composition. And really, that was the beginning of the end. From here, it's just little overlay effects like these lens flares, subtle glows on the bright edges around characters, and overlays like snow. And well, ladies and gentlemen, then you know what time it is. Time for a camera raw filter. You guys always ask about tutorials for this, but let me tell you one thing. I just grab a slider I see, I move it around, see what it does, and if I like it, I keep it. I don't really have any specific techniques here, I just do what I think looks nice. Clarity and texture I do always increase though, I like that crispiness, but other than that, I am just trying things out as well. Color mixer and color grading are probably the most crucial though. So, well, after a whole lot of that, we can finally add The Empire Strikes Back to this collection, leaving only Return of the Jedi still. Let's address the elephant in the room first. Is it really that much better than the previous ones? Yes, it's definitely better, but I'd still say the jump between 3 and 4 is bigger. It's when you start zooming in when you see the real differences. Another very notable thing, it's really quite different from the rest. I really tried my best to align it with the others, but the snow in particular I think really changed it up. It's also a lot softer and more glowy, it just doesn't feel so overly intense, which I used to do. I also think this is the first time where I really prefer the version with no border. I always used to make two versions, one with and one without a border, because you see those borders quite often in these Star Wars posters, and I was always torn between yes or no. Both was cool in its own way, I guess, but for once I strongly prefer the one without the border, and that is probably because of the snow, I'm thinking. This adds just so much brightness to the whole thing, it stands out because of it. And as far as the logo goes, I definitely prefer the original logo. The new style is definitely not a bad look, it's just preference. Final question then, is this the best Star Wars poster I ever made? No. I think my Clone Wars poster still looks cooler, it's pretty recent as well, so it makes sense. I've also always had a soft spot for my Mandalorian posters, both the Season 2 and Season 3 one. I'm still very proud of those, but still, this one I do really like as well. It's a big step up from those previous ones in this series at least, so I think we can consider this a success. And what a cool thing to see the progress over the years. It's so motivating to see and just very cool. So, well, I guess for today that is it then. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like, subscribe, hit the bell not to miss a single future video, then I hope I'll see you in the next one.